You can no longer play the card of it's that person's fault that I feel this way, or it's that situation's fault that I feel this way. No, now you're in full recognition that the circumstance or the person may have presented themselves in a certain way, but the responsibility on how to responsibility, yes, is yours. And if you don't take it, then you're in reaction, and then you're back to you're essentially back to slavery, right? You're a leaf in the wind, or as they said to James Bond in I think it was either Quantum of Solace, or it was certainly one of the Daniel Craig movies. One of the heads of this criminal organization says to James Bond, "You are a kite in a storm, Mr. Bond," or "You're a kite in a hurricane, Mr. Bond." Hey everybody, this is Pablo for Meditation Amsterdam. It's a lovely sunny day here in Guatemala. I'm visiting here for a couple of weeks. I've been living now in Europe for some 15 years. I moved out of Guatemala when I was 27, and today I'm visiting one of my favorite places ever, which is the Pacific coast. It has these dark, volcanic black sand beaches. It has awesome crashy waves. There's great food down there, and my best buddy and I are meeting over there. He's driving with his family, and so it's just fantastic. I woke up with a huge smile on my face today, just because I'm going there, and I've been really looking forward to this. I'm gonna spend a couple of nights at the beach, and so while I drive, I thought I'd share some thoughts with you guys, and a topic that has been playing in my head lately has been the topic of what you could call self-determination and self-mastery versus what you could call giving your power away or being a slave to external circumstances. Okay, so this is a dichotomy that I wanted to expand upon, because it's something that I've noticed shifting in my life as I've been working on meditation and some of the mindfulness techniques that I've been practicing. And I think that there's a great little phrase that a cousin of mine once mentioned when I was a kid, which has stuck with me and which illustrates the problem quite brilliantly. Although in that particular example it was a fairly narrow circumstance, but I think it explains it fairly well. So I'm going to share that one with you. So this is a guy who is he's a football fan. He likes a few teams. And he follows both the National League as well as the Argentinian League for whatever reason. And he has been surrounded by people who you could consider to be perhaps not violent hooligans, but very, very fanatical about some of these teams. Okay? And he said something to me that was really interesting. He said, an extreme football fan is indeed a very silly person, because what they essentially do is they pin their hopes and dreams and the ups and downs in their lives are determined by whether the team won or lost their last match. Okay? In other words, whether you're having a good week or a bad week is entirely dictated by the fact that your team had a victory in the field that weekend or not. And it stuck with me. It was such a profound statement, because it really illustrated the core problem at hand, which is how these people have essentially given their power away entirely, and now their reality is dictated by something outside of them which they cannot possibly control. Okay? And so that is that is almost like the epitome of lack of mental power and lack of mental health and discipline. It's you've essentially you've passed the buck onto somebody else, and you go, well, you know what, my life is probably kind of mediocre, and but it's all because of this thing that's happened outside. And what sticks with me to this day, and keeps reminding me of this little phrase, is the fact that you could make fun of an extreme football fan for thinking this way and for relinquishing their power this way. But it's as they say in the Bible, right? Like you've noticed that the big mistake on somebody else, but you failed to notice the catastrophe in your own life, because to one degree or another, we are all extreme football fans. It might not be around football. It could be because of work. It could be circumstances in your family. It could be circumstances in the political climate of your country, or the economic, an economic peak or downturn. But in essence, the problem is the same. There's an external circumstance which you do not control, and you are allowing it to dictate the ups and downs in your life. Okay, so you could go right ahead and make all the fun you want about these extreme football fans. Like, haha, how could you allow your entire week to be affected by the fact that your team lost during the weekend? But the exact same question can be asked about just about any circumstance in life, and that's where you realize, oh my gosh, I've been equally foolish and equally unwise, and I have been equally a slave to external circumstances, to which I've essentially relinquished my power. And these could be big circumstances in the social atmosphere. It could be also people, right? It could be people to whom you've given your power. Somebody you really like, for example. If you really like a person, and maybe you're hoping to establish a cool friendship with them, or you're hoping that a romantic relationship would grow from knowing this person, and but now you start to notice that whenever they text, you feel happy, and whenever they seem to be ignoring you for a while, or they're just not as present in your life as you would like them to be, all of a sudden your life seems a little bit less worth living, doesn't it? It's I wouldn't call it misery, but suddenly you are not the happy-go-lucky person you used to be. You are you feel disappointed, and things are just not going the way you want. Here's a circumstance you don't control. It's another person. Probably the most volatile entity known to man is another man, and you've given your power away. Essentially, your internal state is being determined by an external force. So you're a slave, essentially. And it sounds very extreme, like oh, you're a slave to this person. But as long as something outside of you affects your internal state of mind, you're subject to it now. And you can almost think about this other example. It was in the movie Fight Club, in which Brad Pitt says the things you own end up owning you, right? Because guess what? You've always dreamt of having this sports car, for example, but the moment you buy it, you are always worrying about whether somebody's going to scratch it or crash against you. And say that a cyclist bumps against the car and damages the car, it is as if they had damaged you, right? You've made it such a part of who you are that now something that is, as a matter of fact, external, has become able to change your state of mind. And there's something to be said about the topic of mine, the idea of something is mine. And this week we had been talking about how Eckhart Tolle describes the moment you make something part of who you are, the moment you call it yours, that's where the problem begins. So the same sports car could have been scratched 2 hours before it was yours, and then you wouldn't care. But the moment it's yours, now it hurts, right? Now you are in pain, and you are upset because you've made it part of who you are, and now this external thing dictates how you feel. Okay, and here's the funny part about it. It's not just with negative circumstances. The mechanics of it work also with positive stuff. So suppose that someone who you consider really a big authority in your life, or who you admire in a big way, gives you praise, right? And you care about their opinion. And when they give you praise, you feel really good, right? So they told you you're good, you're a good boy or you're a good girl, and your day is now so bright, right? So now you're like, oh man, my day is going awesome. They finally recognize who I am, all this effort that I've been putting in, and so says that I'm good. Therefore, I'm having a good day, okay? And so even though you're feeling good at that moment, guess what? Now they own you, right? Now they own your state of mind now, because you have allowed their opinion to dictate how you feel. And this is a tough one to swallow, because you want to be able to gracefully take praise when it's due, and you want to be able to feel good and establish these relationships. If somebody says, hey, you did a great job, you give yourself a pat in the back and you go like, yeah, that's awesome. But much more important than learning how to take praise and having somebody else tells you whether you're good or not, you have to be very diligent at developing that ability to tell yourself when you're good. You got to develop your own criteria about this. Now, here's where I would draw a distinction in that particular example. Say that an expert in a particular field, say karate, you've been practicing your sidekick for a while, and there comes this point where it's second nature to you. It's really part of your neurology and your physiology to throw a fantastic sidekick, and your sensei comes along and he says, good job, you're getting somewhere now. This sidekick is starting to come together. So that's good, and you are in fact allowed to feel good about that. But guess what? You kind of knew this, right? You start to feel it yourself. You knew that your sidekick was improving. You know that the work that you've put in. So his is just a kind of confirmation of this. And you could also say that you are allowed to feel good because of that narrow aspect that you've been working on. The problem is when you attach more meaning than it's due. So suddenly, your sensei saying that you can throw a good sidekick has become the equivalent to you are a good person. You're right. You are a success, and you feel extremely good about all this because you extrapolate his opinion about one aspect of you, and you blow it out of proportion, and it becomes like, oh, I'm having an awesome day because sensei says I can throw a good sidekick. Something that I've been trying to exercise lately, and I hope that in my work environment it doesn't come across as self-effacing or anything like that, but whenever somebody gives me a compliment, what I try to do is I try to take it with a pinch of salt, and I say thank you. That's very kind of you. I did notice that we as a team did this and that well. I also noticed that these are other points where we still need to improve, right? And so rather than let myself my ego run wild and say and go, see, they think you're awesome, right? Like, yeah, of course I am, right? And now my day is great, and I feel finally motivated because others recognize my work. I see it as my job to motivate myself. I'm not gonna be put down by other people. I'm not their slave in that regard, but I'm not gonna allow myself to be propped up by other people either, because that opens the exact same door, and that's something that is very difficult to understand. But it's just a matter of fact. And so when it's very similar to what Buddhists describe as pleasure and pain being two sides of the same coin. It's that if you open yourself for worldly pleasures and deriving your sense of happiness from those, the seed of misery and the seed of pain is already embedded in there, because you've now become you've granted external circumstances the ability to tell you who you are and to dictate how you feel. Okay, it's a subtle point. It's I wish I wish you could take the good and leave the bad out, but it doesn't work that way. And what you're trying to work towards is this sense of equanimity, in which everything is dictated from the inside out. So external circumstances start to lose their meaning as good or bad, because your sense of joy, which is always neutral and has no negative and no opposite, is just flowing from within. Okay, so you know what you need to then start to exercise is just awareness of this, as usual, right? It's you don't give yourself a hard time when you feel bad given a certain external circumstance, and you don't become so self-absorbed and let's say holier than the Pope, in the sense that if somebody gives you praise, you go like, well, screw you and your praise. I dictate. It's like, no, it's all about, are you allowing it to dictate your reality, your state of mind? You can take the positive. You can generate good internal emotions with the positive, but don't kid yourself. Those emotions that the external circumstances are bringing out in you, they're in you, right? They were always in you, both the good and the bad, and the external circumstances are just triggering them. Now, this leads us to the other important point of this video, which is that ultimately, what reality is happening inside you is inside of you, right? So our tendency is to confuse the circumstance with the creator of our emotions. And what the circumstance is the trigger to our emotions. Okay, somebody cuts me off in traffic, I feel upset, and now I'm feeding it with negative thoughts, and I'm insulting this person perhaps, and in my egoic mind, it's their fault that I feel this way, right? They are the ones who created this internal state of mind. What really is happening is that by cutting me off, this person created an internal reaction in me, but they were just the trigger. Okay, the reaction is happening internally, and guess who's responsible for that one? I am, right? It's not that person who's responsible for me being upset. I'm responsible for being upset. So when you start to realize this, then you start to revert that circumstance of being a slave, and you start to realize that power comes not from being able to manipulate other people in doing what you want, or manipulating circumstances to turn out the way you like, although you can work towards some of these things, right? You can negotiate with people, you can become an agent of change in your environment, but people may or may not respond, and circumstances may or may not change. The one thing that you have complete and utter control over, or at least responsibility over, because control is a big word there, we're going to go into that, is how you respond to them. So your reactions, your responses, your thoughts, your emotions are your responsibility. And to the degree that you start to practice things like meditation, practice things like mindfulness, practice things like yoga, like journaling, what you start to notice is that this responsibility starts to become very real. Okay, and at first, it's a double-edged sword, that responsibility, because on the one hand, um, you now have all the power when you take it, but you also have all the responsibility. In other words, the you can no longer play the card of it's that person's fault that I feel this way, or it's that situation's fault that I feel this way. No, now you're in full recognition that the circumstance or the person may have presented themselves in a certain way, but the responsibility on how to respond, responsibility, yes, is yours. And if you don't take it, then you're in reaction, and then you're back to you're essentially back to slavery, right? You're a leaf in the wind, or as they said to James Bond in I think it was either Quantum of Solace, or it was certainly one of the Daniel Craig movies. One of the heads of this criminal organization says to James Bond, "You are a kite in a storm, Mr. Bond," or "You're a kite in a hurricane, Mr. Bond." You know, as in, you have no idea what you're dealing with here, and you have zero control. You're a leaf in the wind, right? So you're completely adrift. So how do you stop being adrift? You take responsibility. You start taking responsibility for your thoughts. You start taking responsibility for your mindset, for your emotions, and for your actions. And the moment you start to take those, that feeling of being empowered starts to grow within you. You suddenly feel like you can trust yourself. Okay, when you are in reaction, when you are giving your power away, you can't possibly trust yourself. You don't have the mind power to direct your life. You don't respect yourself. There's a big chance that you also don't respect others, because you know that respect is something that is a way of life, is a way of rolling, essentially, right? It's not something that you apply a la carte. The same goes for love, right? How do you find love? Well, within yourself. You find love by becoming love, by becoming loving, and it's not something that you apply selectively. And so all those beautiful attributes of respect and love and integrity are going to start becoming part of who you are the moment you start taking ownership for the things that you think and the things that you do. And the moment you start putting an end to the slavery to the outside circumstances, which are sapping your power away. And when that process begins, you start to feel like you're really growing. You start to feel like there was something missing. There was a certain power missing in you, which now starts to be cultivated, and you can feel it growing. You can feel it growing day by day, and you'll be sliding back for sure, right? Like, not every day is a fantastic day, but you will start to feel a sense that now your life is going somewhere. You're now embarked in a beautiful process, the most important and beautiful process you will ever embark in, ever. Okay, and so even though your external circumstances might be quote unquote standing still, or you may be in a certain plateau, and I'll do a separate video on plateaus, by the way, because they're very interesting to talk about. But even though your external circumstances might be exactly the same, you feel like there's traction in your life. You are waking up not dreading the day or not even neutral. You're waking up with a sense of anticipation, curiosity, and enthusiasm, because there's purpose for you now, and the purpose is to become, right? You are working on yourself, and hopefully, if you're listening into vlogs of this kind about self-development, about meditation, things of that kind, then you'll find that that these are almost surefire methods to elicit that growth, even when you don't know how they work. Part of my attitude as a kind of growth hacker or a self hacker is trying to understand how they work, so that I know how to tweak them for myself. And then, it's come to the point where I feel a little bit more ready to share them with others. But it's a very exciting journey that you can take when this starts to happen, and when you start to move away from the slavery of the circumstance and towards being this self-directed person with a lot of integrity, a lot of self-respect, and a lot of love that starts to flow through you. So I hope that made sense to you guys. I'll leave you again with let's say the analogy drawn at the start of the video, which was to say that the hooligan is a silly person whose ups and downs in life are dictated by whether their team won or lost, right? So this is my invitation to you guys. Don't be a hooligan, whether it's about football, whether it's about work, family, whether it has to do with your health. Don't be a victim of the external circumstance. Don't be a slave to it. Be self-driven, take your power, and you'll start your life turning around in all kinds of fantastic ways. So this is Pablo from Meditation Amsterdam. I'm driving to the Pacific Coast in Guatemala during my Christmas holiday. I'm sending you lots of love, and I hope to see you guys soon. Take it easy. Cheers. Bye.